Thank you very much for joining. My name is Emmanuel, and I'll be the co-moderator for this session. I am the product manager for Kaspersky, and I manage the West and SADC regions. Apologies for the delay in starting this. We're just waiting for some of the other attendees to join, but I believe they'll join us as we go. So I'll be joined in this session by Brandon, and Brandon will introduce himself, and he will take the majority of the session. And please, if you have any questions as we go in the session, you can always drop the questions in the Q&A or the chat window, and we'll respond to them appropriately. Thank you very much. So, Brandon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session. Firstly, thank you for DJIT for hosting this session, to, of course, your customer base as well. Now, in today's session, we are going to be discussing Kaspersky fraud prevention. But before we do so, let me just quickly introduce myself. So I'm Brandon Miller. As you can see, I'm the channel pre-sales for Kaspersky in the Middle East, Turkey, and Africa region. So with that being said, I'm pretty much responsible for sessions like this, as well as technical training, amongst other things as well. Now, the idea behind today's session is to focus specifically on Kaspersky fraud prevention, or rather we call it KFP. Now, the solution in itself is dedicated to the discovery, detection, and prevention of fraudulent activity on various different digital channels. Now, as we all move into a more digitalized world, we've got governments moving there, we've got banks, we've got e-commerce, we've got so very many different things that's pretty much handled by either one or two things. And that is, of course, a website and or a mobile application. Now, in this case, of course, if any one of those should be compromised either directly from the business side or from a customer side or let's say user side, that means it can either lead to direct or indirect financial losses or reputational risk or loss of customers and of course compliance issues. Now, fraud can obviously impact business, business digital growth as well. So Kaspersky has brought out the solution, and by the way, this solution has been in the market for quite some time, and it is currently ranked as #1 in the fraud area in various different third-party reviews. But with that being said, Kaspersky fraud prevention is essentially going to make use of machine learning, human intelligence to help businesses to do more to protect against fraud, against various different methods of authentication, theft, etc. So in this case, we try to do our best in providing the highest levels of security, but also at the same time to provide convenience and ease of use to our customers as well as their customers. So this means your customers, right? So in this case, we do this with very low operating cost as well as, of course, very little a very small procedure of implementation that is necessary. So this is both true for online and mobile channels. So with that being said, let's just quickly have a look at a brief introduction into the solution and what it's capable of doing, and then we'll take it on from there. All right. So first and foremost, Kaspersky fraud prevention, or KFP, is what we would call a session-based anti-fraud analysis system. Now, session-based is different from, for instance, a transactional-based detection method. Transactional is obviously focusing just on transactions, but what this solution is doing, it is actually having a look at sessions as a whole. So this means from the moment that your customers essentially visit your website or your mobile application without even needing to log in with their credentials, they would already be put under a microscope to determine if these users are legitimate or not. Now, this doesn't just stop there. It continues right through the bats. It basically checks the login details. It checks various different aspects, as you will see later on in the presentation. But it continually scans, continually monitors every single action taken by these users to identify if it is the actual legitimate user that is obviously logging in with their own credentials, or if it is potentially something else. Now, this can be a bot, it can be a thief, it can be a hacker, it can be various different things. So the core principles or the core functionality of Kaspersky fraud prevention is split up into two different areas. So this means that moving business to digital channels is, once again, of course, very vital for any company that wants to remain visible, recognizable, and profitable in today's day and age. So with those digitalization, there's of course quite a lot of challenges that come to the foreground in implementing these digital transformation strategies. So for all enterprises, their customers and the security services provided are quite frankly very important. So legitimate users need to have easy access to digital services without complex multi-step authentication. Of course, without a solution like this, it is obviously advisable to keep your second factor authentication in place. And even after the implementation of the solution, it is still vital. But with that being said, in addition, it is necessary to identify and block any fraudulent activities as early as possible. And that is just referring back to the point where I mentioned that we literally start combing through information right from the moment that somebody sets foot into, or rather digital foot into one of your digital platforms. So essentially the solution is split up into two different areas. You've got advanced authentication and automated fraud analytics. Talking about advanced authentication, it is essentially a solution that is designed to improve user experience, reduce two-factor authentication cost for the business, and quickly detect suspicious activity. Now, the use of this solution contributes to business growth as well as increased security of the services provided. So focusing a little bit more on the automated fraud analytics. The fraud analytics is essentially the detection of possible fraudulent activity while it has not yet started. So it's basically an early discovery of these possible fraudulent activities. In this case, it provides all the data and analytics that's needed to make accurate and timely decisions when detecting particularly difficult cases. So with any financial institution, it is part of their compliance to have fraud investigators or fraud engineers or whatever the case might be to identify things like this and to report them accordingly. Now, with that being said, the necessary information would be and could potentially be quite scarce if we don't have the right platform that has the visibility as well as the availability of this valuable data. So the data itself is going to be derived from machine learning technology as well as extensive experience, which enables you to more effectively prevent, detect, and block fraud with a high degree of precision and automation. So in a nutshell, it is essentially your toolbox that is going to provide you the necessary tools, the necessary visibility to not only detect fraud as well as respond against it. So this slide essentially answers the simple question of what is the solution, right? Now, of course, there's very many different problems that we need to, we need to have an answer for. But in contrast to some of our competitors, we rely on full analysis of not just the environment, but the device as well. So this means that we monitor both behavioral passive biometrics and patterns, as well as any malicious tracks on the device. So this means that we examine the entire session, while other systems will only consider the logging or the transactional stage. And in this case, it means that we're essentially always on. So the wonderful thing about this is that nothing gets installed on the end user device. We basically just plug in to either the website and or the mobile application. And this is from the implementation stage. And regardless of whether it is a web or mobile channel, of course, both of them can then be protected and can be examined in various different ways. So this means that the solution itself can either be hosted on premise or private cloud deployment options. So it is completely up to how you want to make the solution work for you. So in general, we strive to help our businesses, or rather our customers' businesses on the global arena, to proactively prevent fraud and deliver a smooth customer experience through the use of various different innovative fraud detection technologies. Some of the additional services that Kaspersky can provide would be, for instance, Kaspersky fraud intelligence feeds, for your security information event management solution or SIEM solution. We can provide the necessary monitoring other systems to of course, detect not just the reputation, but to detect various different aspects such as command and control centers related to botnet URLs, mobile command and control center botnet URLs, malicious and phishing URLs, amongst various different other things. Now, the early warning system provides the information about the money laundering activity. And of course, this is especially interesting for central banks or similar. So in this case, it means that we've got all of the right tools and all of the necessary services to be able to supply our customers with the right tools at hand. So the solution is actually quite simple to understand. I'm not going to go into too much technical detail, but the point here is that for businesses that has digitalized a lot of their services, now I'm specifically referring to financial institutions here because that is the majority of the audience, it is likely going to have some form of mobile application to make your life a little bit easier as a consumer, as well as a website. Now, in this case, we are not expecting any deployments on any of your customer base, as I've already mentioned. However, all that we're going to need is basically just the plugin into either your mobile application or website or both. So in this case, it means that both of these channels are essentially going to have continuous connection to the Kaspersky fraud prevention cloud. And from there, the analysis will take place in the cloud. And essentially, we will then make all of the let's say, incidents, create all of the incidents out of that. Now, KFP uses various different complex range of advanced technologies with machine learning and human intelligence applied for proactive detection of sophisticated fraud schemes. Now, this can happen across both web and mobile channels. It can happen in real time and even before the transaction itself occurs. So during the user session in the online banking, we analyze a wide range of users' depersonalized information, like how he uses his device, or she uses her device. We basically monitor things like how they move the mouse, hold the device, find anomalies in the behavior and navigation, and check if the device location, what is the geographical location of this device, and more than 100 other parameters that are typical for the user, and check the device for an infection as well, for any form of malicious injection, signature or non-signature based malware, as well as banking Trojans. Now, in this case, it means that it is essentially going to be a full-fledged addition to your existing application, which means that we are going to do things like checking if the application is being monitored by any other application on a mobile device. And for instance, if it's the website, then in that case, we're also going to monitor those things to identify if there's any current remote desktop tools or remote access tools that's currently being used to monitor that screen. So in this case, all of those different aspects are going to be monitored on the user machines so that we can identify if there's possible fraudulent activity taking place, or even some form of account takeover that is taking place. Now, with that being said, the detection approach that we have in the solution itself, it looks quite complex, and frankly speaking, it is, but let's try to make it as simple as possible. So in contrast to some of our competitor vendors, KFP relies on full analysis of the device, environment, behavioral passive biometrics and patterns, as well as any malicious tracks on the device, as I've mentioned already. So in this case, we consider the entire session, not just the transactional stage. So with that being said, the user session in online banking is going to start from the login and authorization in the service. And in this case, the fraudster can appear on the session on any stage. So from login stage by using stolen credentials, or connect in parallel with a legitimate user session. So even if fraudster is not going to make a fraudulent attempt today and just check the leftovers on the balance and usual dates and sums of the transactions of the client. So here we are going to make a risk assessment, and essentially we are of that specific session, and we're going to continuously notify you in real time of our verdict and our scoring about the user if it has changed from good to fraudulent. Now, all of these pointers, all of these, let's say, parameters that is identified is going to be vital information for any fraudulent investigations or fraud detection or fraud analysis engineers. So in this case, I mean, online fraud detection is going to work continuously from the beginning of the session to the end. So we are going to monitor every single aspect, everything ranging from how quick the mouse moves, what is the typical locations, the speed at which typing is taking place, if typing is taking place at all. All of these different biometrics are going to be identified, and we are going to use the machine learning engine behind the solution to be able to identify different users, different user patterns, and essentially we're going to look out for especially abnormalities or, let's say, atypical behavior. So our detection approach consists of 3 different parts: device identification, standard monitoring, and advanced monitoring. So those 3 together is essentially going to do with device identification, which pretty much is the first place we're going to have a look at, because from here we have built-in profiles for devices and user accounts. So an account will come later to us after the login step, but at the same time, we have only 3 human understandable entities: the device, the user account, and the session. So among the 3 of these specific entities, this is the best risk assessment that can be done for the device. So this is why the device identification goes first. So we're going to check, various different identifying parameters, MAC addresses, all of the various different points that we can gain access to. Then we can apply standard risk assessment. So this is the second step. So by standard, I mean something that doesn't require a complex analysis. We can use antivirus databases, IP reputation, remote access tool, signature detection, geolocation, blacklists, and so on. And then last but not least is the advanced monitoring. So here we are talking about detection approaches that need time and data. So passive biometry, navigation analysis, and so on. So it cannot be used at the login stage. So mostly it is applied after login. And here we can detect social engineering, various different new schemes. So our fraud analyst team can create a complex incident rule to try and detect new schemes and social engineering. So this is in an effort to not only identify fraudulent activity, but also to identify, for instance, account takeover, where somebody's account credentials or credentials has already been shared with a third party or stolen by a third party. And in this case, we can clearly identify that this third party is not the individual that we have come to know. So a couple of examples of indicators, especially of abnormal activity, is, for instance, fast travel. So obviously an example of fast travel would be that one moment you are logging in from, let's say for argument's sake, from Kenya, and then a couple of minutes later you're logging in from somewhere like in Russia. That's obviously an example of fast travel, and that is something that is one of the abnormal activity detections. So from there's various different other ones, such as compromised device, remote access tools, new device fingerprints, browser changes, many accounts from a single device, Tor browser, amongst various different other things. Now, a short list of collected parameters for device fingerprint profiling. As you can see, we've got different capabilities between a mobile device and web channels. But the point being here is that each one of them is unique in nature, right? I mean, in a mobile device, you're typically going to make use of an app in comparison to where if you're using a laptop or a desktop, you're going to more than likely use a web channel. Now, each one of them has their own unique identifications and their own unique capabilities of detection. Because I mean, for instance, on a mobile device, we can literally gauge the size of a finger that is used, as well as the pressure that is used on some smartphones to type. Right. Then we're going to see the swipe and the typing speeds. We're going to see the gesture boundaries, geolocations. We're going to be able to see navigation transitions, device fingerprints, list of other installed applications, and so on and so forth. Now, in this case, under the criteria that is unique to a mobile device is, for instance, we're going to check the operator. We're going to check the SIM card, the operator details. We're going to check this hardware itself, so CPU, display, memory, input devices and sensors, systems such as the version, the environment, the specific parameters surrounding a mobile device itself. Now, as I've mentioned to you already, these two are unique in their own way, and we would need to have the capability to detect, let's say, fraudulent activity or anything similar by using what we have available. Now, fortunately, in a mobile device, we have quite a lot more available in comparison to, for instance, a web channel, because a desktop is not going to provide you the capability to see the pressure at which you type, just for argument's sake. But in this case, in web channels, we are going to use various different, let's say, parameters also that is unique to a desktop. So we're going to be able to see keyboard strokes, the speed at which the keyboard strokes are pressed, mouse movement and clicks. Now, mouse movement and clicks is actually vitally important because typically as a user, you have a specific speed at which you move the mouse, a specific area that you typically leave your mouse in and click, and specific web pages that you visit when you are visiting a banking website. So in this case, it is going to have a look at various different actions and various different points. And even we can go so far to identify the fonts that is installed on a specific device. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a very unique characteristic to each and every single device. Some may have a lot, some may have little, some may have just one or two. So in this case, that's also going to help us to identify varying devices in that device identification. So with that brief, let's say, intro, just talking about the implementation of the solution itself, do not worry, it is not a very complex procedure. However, we are going to require some input from your side to be able to help us with the integration procedure. Now, with that being said, from a Kaspersky standpoint, we're going to do the necessary preparations. We're going to provide the necessary sensors for both web and mobile channels. The integration of these sensors into the web and mobile channels is the responsibility of the customer. However, we provide the necessary guidance and the assistance from our side. Now, that is just merely the input of additional code into either a mobile application or the HTML of the website itself. Now, both of which is actually very short, and essentially it's just calling the service from Kaspersky. And in this case, we are not rewriting the entire application in any way, shape, or form. So in this case, once that has been done, once the integration is done into the respective mobile channels or web channels, then we are typically going to take a 3-week period for data collection. Now, this period is essentially a period of learning, right? Because in that period of learning, we are going to identify all of the users that has logged on through the various channels for that entire period. We're going to identify their behavior. We're going to identify the way that they operate. And in this case, obviously, if users don't log on during those 3 weeks of data collection, we would take it one by one when we get to that area. But nonetheless, after that period is done, typically there's going to be a small adjustment. We're going to get the results, and then the solution will be put into a full-fledged active mode. In this case, the necessary, let's say, threat identification will be put in place. The necessary incident creation procedures would also be put in place. So focusing a little bit more about the specifics. In this case, we need to talk about Kaspersky Advanced Authentication, which is a part of the KFP platform. As you remember, we've got those two different areas. Now, with the digitalization and everyone moving towards a digital channel, and especially now during and after the pandemic, where a lot of businesses was forced to go into a digital transformation, and that is just purely because a lot of people needed to work from home and so on and so forth. But the point here is that several concerns come to the front while implementing the strategy of digitization. So what definitely matters to all of the businesses are their clients and the security of the services that they actually provide. So legitimate users are going to want to have a frictionless access to these digital services without any additional burden of authentication steps. Also, fraudulent activity also needs to be detected and stopped in a timely manner. So basically as early as humanly possible. So with advanced authentication, it is essentially going to be the platform specially created to improve the user experience. At the same time, it is going to assist the business to cut the cost of a second factor authentication. And it is also going to continuously detect suspicious activity, leading to business growth and high levels of security. So advanced authentication knows who is using your services in web and mobile channels, a legitimate user, or a fraudster, a human, or a bot. So the analysis of behavioral data, passive biometrics, as well as device environmental information around it is going to result in objective risk assessment. So essentially, it's going to be risk-based assessment, and it is going to assign a specific score. So this means that it's a weighted analysis of hundreds of unique parameters from the beginning of the session that is going to provide a balanced estimation with certain outcomes. So for instance, legitimate users get rid of annoying and unnecessary authentication steps. Suspicious users are eligible for additional verification, and the most suspicious activities are subject to strong verification with possible restriction of access. Now, all of these criteria, all of these steps are going to assist the business to defend themselves as well as defend their customers from any possible, let's say, infiltration from a third party, which is quite clear that we don't want. So the weighted analysis of hundreds of unique parameters is essentially going to provide us with that balanced, let's say, estimation. Now, machine learning technologies and continuous analysis of all of these parameters in real time is going to enable for a dynamic risk assessment, allowing you to make a fast and an accurate decision. Either let the user in or ask for additional verification or completely restrict the access. So when the system detects any signs of abnormal or suspicious behavior, it is automatically going to send the appropriate signal to your internal monitoring systems. Thus, high-risk operations are thoroughly investigated, whereas legitimate operations are processed automatically without any delays with higher levels of accuracy. So the behavioral biometrics and analysis applied proactively to uncover criminal activity as early as the logon attempt happens by looking at plenty of unique user parameters and comparing them to the patterns of legitimate behavior. So essentially, Kaspersky Advanced Authentication is going to cut the cost of second factor authentication. It is going to make it a more frictionless experience for the users, meaning it's going to be easier for them to get in. At the same time, it is going to provide higher levels of security in general to both the customers and towards the business or the bank in this case. All right. So the second part is Kaspersky Automated Fraud Analytics. Now, this solution is intended to help anti-fraud analysts and information security specialists detect suspicious activity and complex fraud schemes. So early warning signs of money laundering and monitoring of session events in real time. So the business itself is going to receive all of the information through the web console or through an API if necessary. So this means that the functional capabilities of the automated fraud analytics is going to be the following three, which is automated global entity linking and mapping. So basically identifying machines, not just in your business or not just from your customer base, but from global entity linking and mapping. It is going to have deep learning based behavioral analysis, as well as flexible rules to of course, identify, prevent, respond against the various different threats related to fraud. So The basic principle of how it works is that we are going to plug in our JS or SDK, which is collecting anonymized data about the client's users. So hundreds of unique parameters. This data is then collected and goes to the detection engine. So based on the assessment of collected parameters, the information serves three different purposes. The first purpose is risk-based authentication, or RBA, to determine who is trying to access their online account. That's the first step, right? Then we are going to detect anomalies using this information to boost existing transactional information. So if a bank, for example, has it in place already, a good example of how KFP can serve as an add-on, for instance. So if you already have a transactional anti-fraud solution, basically what that means is we can join onto that and provide additional information that a transactional solution will not be able to provide. So then, of course, incident management. So this means that anomalies are going to be grouped into incidents. So for example, a bank's fraud analyst with the Kaspersky team might decide that a new device plus a new location should be detected as an incident right away, and of course be reported to the incident management. Now, this would be set up essentially in the incident rules engine. And from there, you can create your own modifications, own configurations, and essentially you will have the full guidance of the fraud experts within Kaspersky as well to set this up, to ask for guidance, to ask for, let's say, various different, pointers and tips on how to do it best. Now, just to mention a couple of challenges for the banking segment. Now, currently we are in 2021, almost at the close of 2021, but it is expected that loss from online payment fraud is to double, to more than double actually, by 2023, which is going to then reach about 48 billion annually in US dollars. So the indirect costs related to these fraudulent activities, fraudulent attempts, takeover of accounts, etc., is obviously causing indirect costs in the form of reputation damage. So this means that publicity is not obviously on your side always. In this case, users want to have access and data protection at the same time. Now, in this case, you are going to, let's say, ease your mind of consumers by still providing easy methods of implementation, or rather easy methods of login, easy methods of use, but at the same time protecting them from various different fraudulent activities. Then operating costs. So of course, two-factor authentication is costly and it can frankly be quite slow. Now in this case, KFP can assist legitimate users by bypassing second-factor authentication and at the same time save a lot of money towards the bank itself. So the final one here is compliance issues, and this means that legal standards are a headache for enterprises. And we all know this. I mean, if you are working in IT, you already know of all of the various different compliance requirements set out by customers. So in this case, it just is doubled when it is, for instance, a financial institution. So while the realities of fraud are all consuming, about 82% of users claim that they don't want to switch online banking providers due to the convenience of an app. Moreover, about 95% of users are confident that their personal data is being provided with an excellent level by the bank. Now, that last point over there is essentially going to be, it just depends, but nonetheless, it's not always the case, unfortunately. We've unfortunately seen quite a lot of banks not necessarily dealing with the personal information in a proper manner. So this implies elevated responsibility for financial institutions, and financial institutions rely on the practice of know your customer. So in order to protect themselves and their customers from illegal transactions, so given the heavily required identity verification that financial institutions face, many cybersecurity threats, such as money laundering, new account fraud, and account takeover, can essentially lead to various different points of failure. So for all of the information, by the way, guys, for all of the information that we are sharing with you, statistics, reports, all of these things are available on request. So all of the statistics that you see on screen, I can provide to you if necessary. So in this case, just let us know and we can provide that information to you. But nonetheless, the truth of the matter is that fraudsters continually improve their tools. Remember, they take it very seriously, like I take my job very seriously. I try to always improve myself. I try to always be a little bit more efficient, a little bit more effective, and they are the exact same. This is quite evident if you have a look at the various different tools and the various different techniques that's currently being employed and being developed by fraudsters. So we are obviously at the forefront of discovering the different techniques. And of course, with that being said, obviously the future is quite bleak, if you ask me, because it's not going to slow down. It's not going to become easier. As a matter of fact, it's just going to become harder. It's going to become a lot more dangerous for any institution, not just financial institutions, but any institution that has any form of digital footprint. So if we are talking about phishing, now, of course, phishing is almost synonymous with emails coming in from banking institutions or financial institutions. So if you have a look at a little quick scenario here, back in 2000, well, not back in, but in 2021, a fraudulent group was discovered in one of the clients, one of our clients, and they are working in the financial sector. So KFP is basically with KFP deployed. It basically discovered that there's various phishing pages and copies of the pages of the bank's original website. And this page is a bank entrance, of course, with fields for entering personal data. Now, after entering the data, the second authentication factor SMS code was requested. Then the phone number was relinked. So this page, as well as its subsequent copies, used masking for some IP addresses. So this means that subsequent phishing URLs were generated because the detected pages were blocked by Kaspersky's efforts. So after blocking, after about 1.5 weeks, this group created a new similar page. So to detect the actions of this group, Kaspersky Fraud Prevention configured new rules for detecting suspicious activity related to new device, binding of a new phone number or new fingerprint, as well as environmental fingerprint, which is a separate entity altogether. So together, these parameters quite accurately help to identify the digital fingerprint of the devices. The fraudulent devices were included in the blacklist of the solution, which is provided, of course, with KFP, along with the whitelists for legitimate users. So the KFP team had a suggestion that these could be cloud devices, but this has not been confirmed as yet. So a port scan was also performed on the financial institution where no remote administration devices or or RATs were found. So most likely the fraudulent group used several of their own devices to implement the scheme. This conclusion followed from the fact that the cookies were not cleaned and the device's environment did not change. Then there were new devices and the environment is the same. So as you can see, just as literally in this year, we've had quite a lot of investigations that we handled. This is just one of the many that we've handled in 2021. And as I've mentioned to you already, the solution is only one part of what you would be getting as a customer. You're also getting the expertise and the experience that our teams actually bring to the playing field. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is almost next to none. So, of course, when we talk about social engineering, now social engineering is essentially tricking somebody in believing something that is not the truth. All right. So KFP Technologies revealed another case of social engineering in one of the financial institutions. So this was possible thanks to the simultaneous use of two technologies based on machine learning. This is device enrollment analysis and collecting behavioral or biometric data. This combination of data made it possible to identify situations during which long-term phone calls were recorded simultaneously with the user's activity in their account. So paying attention to the fact that calls and activity started and ended at the same time. So as well as the fact that this activity was not typical for the user, which once again, an atypical behavior or abnormal behavior was detected. The KFP team of analysts was able to conclude that these sessions events indicate scams, essentially. So they found a method to basically to simulate an entire phone call, which was recorded. And at the same time, they were able through the call to gain access to the banking login credentials or whatever the case might be, simply due to the fact that they used a social engineering method. So a lot of, let's say, fraud actually happens because users actually are not well enough informed in the sense of how to deal with unsolicited phone calls from, let's say, banking institutions or from any other institution, to be honest, that ask them their login credentials. Now, all of this leads to, quite frankly, scary numbers of fraudulent attempts and successful fraud that takes place. So there's another specific case that we can go into quite a lot of detail in, but I thought I'm not going to go into too much detail into this particular one because we're all going to run out of time. But just to give you an idea of what it would look like, have a look at the specific screenshot that we have here. Now, this is essentially what we would describe as, for instance, unnecessary accounts being created. Now, in this case, it means that a lot of online retailers, e-commerce websites, some banks even have some form of bonus accounts. Right? Now, bonus accounts can be anything from a loyalty program or anything similar. And sometimes these institutions make the mistake of allowing for, let's say, a major discount or a nice little credit when you sign up. And with all of this, we can quite easily identify the same device behavior and the same device being used to create multiple accounts. So in this case, you can quite clearly see that in the bottom right of this screenshot, there's one machine that sits at the center of various different accounts that is in red. Now, in this case, it's quite frankly, that was identified and it was blocked. So the machine was put on a blacklist. All of the accounts was put on a blacklist because, of course, this is fraudulent activity. So, I mean, that just brings me to the following points. With these bonus accounts or loyalty programs, whatever the case might be, that is also going to have a significant impact on the amount of money lost by the business due to, let's say, fraudulent credit being generated out of free accounts or something similar. Now, in this case, KFP can also help to identify these different points and block any, let's say, additional account creations from these specific devices. Now, with that being said, we basically provided you now with a brief overview of some of the possible scenarios and some of the possible capabilities that this solution will have in your environment. But just as a closing part from my side, I'd just like to quickly show you a couple of informational points around the solution itself. Now, I believe the majority of you should be aware of Gartner Peer Insights. So currently, Gartner Peer Insights has a 100% recommendation. It is also the highest rated vendor in the field of online fraud detection. So this means that Kaspersky is the most recommended vendor in the field of online fraud detection. So this is based off of 26 reviews, and this is as of 19th of August 2021. So it's quite recent information. But the point being here is that these are all from confirmed customers. And with that being said, they go through quite a strenuous process to be identified as a legitimate customer that will be able to submit these reviews and these results. Nonetheless, if you wanted to find out a little bit more information about what I've been discussing today, you're welcome to go and have a look at our latest annual fraud reports. So there's various different fraud reports that we have available. So you can see there's the link at the bottom, kfp.kaspersky.com/resources. And at the end, I will also provide you with a QR code to make it a little bit easier for yourself. Additionally, you can also go and have a look at the benefits, the costs, and the risks associated with an investment into the solution. So Forrester has interviewed one of our customers with more than 2 years of experience using the solution. And essentially, they've also provided the economic impact, the total economic impact of the solution itself. And that can be found once again at kfp.kaspersky.com/total-economic-impact. All right. So with that being said, if you wanted to find out a little bit more information about KFP in general, you can go and have a look at us on YouTube. There's a couple of webinars about this from directly the KFP team members and the business development manager before KFP, which is going to be Claire Hatcher. So in this case, hopefully the information shared with you today has been useful, has been helpful, and hopefully has sparked a little bit of interest in the solution and the possibility of making use of the solution.